we're live. Okay, hello everyone. We're here with, of course, Dr. Stuart Shanker, and we're here to talk to you today about Self-Reg. I have a few questions for Stuart. It's Elizabeth here at the Penguin Canada offices. But before I get things started, I'm going to toss it over to Stuart just to give us a brief introduction to the book.
Hi everybody. This is a book that I started to write 20 years ago, and then we had a couple of interruptions along the way. Not least of which we set up a brain institute, so we got to really look at inside kids' brains when we were doing all this stuff, and the end result is we got a very strong book now with an incredible team behind us at Penguin.
Yeah, very cool. So I'm gonna quickly ask you some questions about the book, but I see that lots of people are joining us live online, so if anyone has any questions at all, please feel free to type in your questions and we'll see if we can get them answered before the end of the broadcast. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, Self-Reg, one of the big things about the book is there's no such thing as a bad kid. What problems do we see going unnoticed in kids and often get chalked up to kids simply being bad kids?
So there's really, Elizabeth, there's two sides to that question. The first one is the kid who's being, let's say, oppositional or, has these explosive moments. They typically get labeled as a bad kid. But also the kid that is oppositional, the kid who kind of digs his heels in, maybe bolts or refuses to cooperate. These are really signs, all these behaviors are signs that this kid has way too much stress in his life. Or simply the kid who won't respond when you call out his name over and over. In fact, what's really going on, we now know, is that when a child goes into fight or flight, that part of the brain that processes the human voice actually becomes really subdued. He doesn't hear you, that's why he's not responding. So all sorts of behaviors that we typically found frustrating or worrisome or annoying, really we needed to reframe them to see that these are signs that the stress load's too high and something's going on inside the brain that we can change.
Mm-hmm. One term that I was introduced to when I was reading the book was stress behavior. Yeah. In brief, what is stress behavior and how can we spot it in our kids?
So it's a good question. I think it's probably the most important question. And one of the points that I was making just the other day for a blog I wrote for Maria Shriver was, we all know how to distinguish between, say, misbehavior and being sick. And nobody gets mad at their child when the child needs to go to bed and get plenty of fluids. And we know what all the signs are of when a child is sick. Well, the distinction between misbehavior and stress behavior is every bit as significant. And in fact, the signs of stress behavior, once you know them, are every bit as profound as the signs of when a child is sick. The reason why it's so important is that if you treat stress behaviors, these are behaviors that are the result of a shift that goes on in the brain when the kid's under too much stress. If you treat them as a misbehavior, then what happens is you actually add to the child's stress load, and you add to your own stress load too, so everything gets worse. So this is a hugely important discovery, and the truth is that once you recognize this distinction, things change very quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that I really liked about the book was how it's very much about, we as educators and parents and, anybody dealing with kids, we need to manage our own behavior in order to help our children. What are some of the simplest things that we can do to kind of manage that stress behavior?
I think the first step, you have to read the book. that's the short answer.
That's a very good answer.
But the first step is kind of critical for parents or educators or any adult as much as for ourselves as it is for the kid, and that's the step we call reframing. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? Well, in simplest terms, reframing is making that distinction between, say, misbehavior and stress behavior. But the interesting thing about this is that we get all sorts of cues that we tend to ignore that tell us when we ourselves are overstressed. So let me give you an example. You wake up at 3 in the morning and you have all these worries that are going through your head. And you think at 3 in the morning, well, I really have to work on these, solve these. But of course, nobody solves problems at 3 in the morning. You need to be sleeping. And that jolting wide awake in the middle of the night is in fact an important cue that your stress load is way too high. So we do get these cues, and Self-Reg teaches us how to recognize when we ourselves are overstressed. And let me tell you something, Elizabeth, we all are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. One last question. I mean, one thing that I really took from the book and I enjoyed, I thought it had a very hopeful message.
Yeah.
Self-Reg. Do we feel hopeful about the way Canadians are raising their kids?
So, I'm not sure if we mentioned this in the book now or not, but I was giving a talk up in Yellowknife, and it was minus 42 that night. And it was in a theater, and both levels of the theater were packed. And I couldn't believe this. And at the end of the talk, we had a very good session. At the end of the talk, I said, "What are you guys all doing here? It's cold out there." And one voice from up above shouted down, "You make us hopeful."
Oh.
And yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And for me, that was like the most important experience I've ever had around this work, because that's what it is about. What it's about is always being hopeful, because you know what? Once you start to do this, we can always change a trajectory. Always.
Yeah, that's a lovely note to leave things on. Before we say goodbye, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you watching, and please go out and buy Self-Reg. It's a very important book. And we'll, on that note, say goodbye. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Elizabeth.